Ladies and gentlemen, please have a seat. I try again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Anne-Catherine Husson-Traoré. I'm the CEO of Novetic, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome you for this One Planet Summit event organized in partnership with the Green Climate Fund to, as it is on the screen, to scale up blended finance for low carbon and green transition, just at the occasion of the high-level pledging conference that will be set tomorrow. Blended finance is the use of catalytic capital, public and philanthropic sources to mobilize additional private sector investment and developing shuttles. And we are, and I think it will improve after this conference, we are around, in blended finance, around $15 billion. In annual blended finance remains, however, a small fraction of annual development finance. So that's why today is so important, because, and tomorrow, today's session will therefore engage both partners of the One Planet Summit and Green Climate Fund to explore the barriers and best practices to expanding blended finance and maximize its impact. For your information, direct translation French-English is available. This event is streamed, and we are with, if you want to tweet, the hashtag is climate action. Just everything is on the screen. So before jumping to the conversation, let me remind to all speakers the rule that they have just 5 minutes to speak. Remember, 5 minutes. So I will come back to this challenge every 5 minutes. The first people who tried to speak in just 5 minutes is Brune Poisson, the French Secretary of State to the Minister for an Ecological and Solidarity Transition, which she will welcome you just in a few seconds.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue à Paris. Welcome to Paris. Thank you for being here today. Thank you also, and the World Bank and the United Nations join me in thanking you for being here today, for making it all the way to Paris, and also for being actively involved in the high-level pledging conference of the GCF, which also gives me an opportunity to thank you. Mr. Glemark, thank you for co-organizing and co-hosting the event here with us today. So it always gives me a lot of pleasure to see, and a lot of happiness to see the One Planet Summit community back together, and most importantly, to see it also widening. We are welcoming every time more members, and I think it's great because it means that if we keep attracting new partners, it also means that more and more organizations, people, NGOs, companies want to do more for climate. And that gives us a lot of hope, because I think what we need now is hope. President Macron, the UN and the World Bank launched the One Planet Summit 2 years ago. It was not by chance. It was because President Trump decided to leave the Paris Agreement. And now here we are, almost 2 years later. And in a few days, the United States might actually, I say might because we'll always have a ray of hope, but might actually for real leave the Paris Agreement. So what do we need? I think we need what brings us together, the willingness to act, and to act even more for climate, for biodiversity, and to change, to transform things, such as, for example, the financial system. And in 2 years, we have achieved a lot. Just to give you a few examples. Institutional and private investors that represent the $37 billion have committed to doing more for climate. They're changing their mindset and the way they work slowly. I say slowly because it's never fast enough. Even though in 2 years, they've been a long way. For example, 42 central banks and supervisory authorities of the network for greening the financial system are building the tools to measure the long-term risks associated with climate change. Another example, GFIs have now committed to align their portfolio with the Paris Agreement, so things are moving. What we need is action that makes the Paris Agreement irreversible. And I know that being here, you also share the vision of France, the vision of the World Bank and of the United Nations. And what is our vision? What is the vision that we have? We want to break silos. We want to talk about nature, the environment. It's all the same. When we talk about climate change and when we talk about protecting biodiversity, we need to talk about and we need to tackle the issues together. It's not two streams. It's the same. We won't be able to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 if we don't protect nature. And this is the challenge ahead of us for the year 2020. We also need to transform the financial system. We need the tools if we are to achieve scale. So we need to have a systemic approach. We don't want green finance on one side and then all the rest stays brown. We want to green the financial system. And here a lot of minds have been working on that for years. And what we are humbly trying to do is actually turn it into something real. So obviously, blended finance, which is what brings us together today, is a key part of the solution. But we need to address three challenges when it comes to blended finance. First, geography. Africa gets too little money. It gets too little of the blended finance, of the investment, of the risks taken. We also need to focus way more on middle-income countries. Because in such countries, in these countries, 60% of the poor, of the extremely poor, live in middle-income countries. Second challenge, the sectors that are targeted. Blended finance is still way too focused on energy or on financial services. We need to explore new frontiers, such as agriculture, the ocean. Can you believe that? I'm yet to identify and to find, and I'm sure perhaps, and I would hope that one of you has the answer, but I'm still waiting to see blended finance applied to find a solution to the Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is the ocean. How are we going to achieve carbon neutrality if the ocean are not in good shape? So we need blended finance to explore agriculture, water, sanitation, biodiversity, as I just said. Third challenge, the sources of financing. We need more investment from institutional investors. It's still a lot is coming from either corporates or financial institutions, which is great, but we need more actors to come on board. And lastly, I think what we all need all together, and that's a huge challenge, we need to get the right narrative out. We all understand each other, but trust me, I'm struggling to explain to the people in my constituency what this whole meeting is about. That's what we need to do. We need to be able to communicate that clearly. Otherwise, people won't be able to know that we are actually seriously trying to change things and achieve systemic scale. If they don't listen to us, if they don't believe us, then they will turn to populists. Or they will turn to the other extreme, which is the no-growth collapse, the people who believe that the planet is going to collapse overnight. And these two actually think the same and have the same result, which is they prevent action. They prevent climate action. But I know it's not your case, so I'm really glad to welcome you here today in Paris. Thank you for all the work you've been doing with us. Welcome to the new members. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and it's great to start now. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Brune. We have now the same kind of inspiring talks from Axel von Totzenberg, which is the new manager of World Bank. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome. Thank you, Minister. Actually, you made most of my points, so I agree. So that's the good news. I think, let me say that we need to do a lot more, and we need to actually, I agree with you what you say, we need not only a plan of action, you need to act. And I think we have had enough declarations. The time has come that we translate declaration into action. And I think there is some good news, and there are additional challenges for us. First, every organization or every country has to look what you can do by yourself and what you can push. And I think the good news is that the World Bank has looked at it itself. We had the capital increase for our private sector arm and for the public sector arm, IBRD and IFC. And we had, of course, IDA, where also one of the special themes has been climate change. But for those two things, we have estimated that you need to align also your action to the 2030 agenda, so that you don't take a two-year plan, but you are looking where are you wanting to be in 2030. So that what we calculated is we want to be having projects that generate about $335 billion in climate benefits cumulative through 2030. And we have last year at the COP made an intermediate goal of 200 billion. But in a way, to take a longer view is, I think, important. Secondly, it's not only talking about the aggregate benefits, but you need to look what you are going to do. Are these mitigation co-benefits or also adaptation? We have said that you have also to do the difficult part on adaptation co-benefits, and we are delivering on that as well. Right now, of all the multilaterals, we deliver 2/3 of the adaptation benefit. We need more people doing this as well. So that is, I think, certainly as you look at the organization, and I think we need to have a very sharp focus on this. I think the good news is that last week there were continued negotiations for IDA 19. Again, climate change remain a very prominent special topic on which we have to deliver. And I agree with you about particularly on Africa. Now, the good news is of the money, if you take IDA 18, about $45 billion out of the 75 is going to Africa. So I think we need to do more, and we need to sharply look at it. However, you don't only need to look at in a narrow zone the climate change. We need to look at blue and green ecosystem. So we have been also developing this further, and I know that Nauko is there. I was the co-chair of Jeff with her. We have been also looking at biodiversity. I hope, I think it's actually good news that I'm now seeing it's popping up. It's overdue. It's overdue, let me tell you, but we have been championing that. So I think it's very good news to hear it. Secondly, we need to broaden the coalition. And I think what is welcome news is now that the finance ministers are getting around, and under the leadership of the Chilean and Finnish finance ministers, they have been building a coalition, and it has actually got a lot of traction. Since April, they have now, at the annual meetings, they were welcome 50 finance ministers around the table. We need that because finance ministers will need to be involved, and it cannot be limited only to the sector ministries as well. Finally, we need to jointly think about scale, because whatever we do, it is not enough. So here we need to think about the private sector and how we get the private sector more involved on this. And I think that we are doing that certainly with the IFC, and that is good news, but we need to think wider. I think the minister also raised an interesting problem It's about the risks involved in this, particularly in Africa. What we have been trying to do is now to start also with de-risking investments in the most fragile environments so that the private sector can get involved. However, it is my sense is it is nice if an IFC does this, but we need to have this much more broad base so that actually it makes a difference, because apart from the investments, it is good for the environment, but we also need to keep in mind it is good for job creation. So that we need to do it. I think that at the end of the day, I think I hope that this call for action will be heard. I love to be here, particularly for those who are attending the Green Climate Fund. I will tell you that the French tended to offer us the idea to have here the launching event, actually in this building. We tended to come out with very good results. So I hope this is also a good omen for you and you end up with a wonderful result. I think together we can only do it. The bank is there, and we are going to be very focused on actually results. Less talk, do it, and let's do it together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Do it. Call to action and do it. We have to do it together. So it's naturally the time to have the United Nations point of view with you, Ambassador Luis Alfonso de Alba. You are the special envoy of UN, Secretary General for the 219 Climate Summit. So here you are. I mean it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. Minister, very happy to be in Paris. Let me start by fully coinciding with you and with Axel. I think the key word is action, and that's exactly what the Secretary General Antonio Guterres tried to do by convening the summit that just took place 1 month ago. And I think we can all feel satisfied with the results of that summit. And I would highlight a few of the achievements which may not be totally understood yet. I would say the first one is the capacity of the UN to have in a single setting a set of actors and to send the message that only building partnerships we will be able to achieve the scale and the level of resources and actions that are needed. For those of you that have not followed this summit and do not follow the UN, it may not be a big achievement, but to have a meeting at the United Nations at the plenary on which we had 60 participants coming from governments and at the same time 30 participants coming from other members of civil society, local authorities, financial institutions, indigenous representatives, certainly the business sector. I think that was quite an achievement. I think it was also quite an achievement that we all focus on action and no more speeches. We ask everybody to come with plans, and we built some concrete initiative with the help of coalitions, one of them, the one on finance, led by France, Qatar, and Jamaica, and producing very concrete results. We saw a number of countries coming with increased commitments on finance, certainly new pledges for the Green Climate Fund that tomorrow I think they will be formalized, but some other commitments I would like to highlight, for instance, the commitments of Germany and the commitment of the UK to double the support for climate action in terms of cooperation. I think we also saw a number of asset owners, as it was mentioned by Minister Poisson, which are beginning to move in the right direction. But we have to be very clear, it's just the beginning. We still need to do much more. And what I wanted to tell you today mainly is not only what we have achieved, but the importance of keeping in the follow-up of the summit, keeping in working together. With the World Bank, with the other institutions, the United Nations intends to do a very strict follow-up. By now, you are already able to look into the results of the summit online. And not only what the pledges, not only what the initiatives that have been presented are, but you will be able to see what is the evolution. We will hold accountable all of the participants, public and private, at the summit, and we will be reporting periodically on progress on that field. I think those are probably some of the most important messages that I had, but I cannot omit one, which I think it is also very important. We have been talking about Africa, but I would like to talk about the seeds and the LDCs in general. I think we have an obligation to address that, and the Secretary General intends to do that in the coming weeks, if not weeks, in the coming months. We need to respond to the specific needs of those countries, and special needs, especially when it comes to finance. My last word goes to the success of the pledging conference tomorrow with the Green Climate Fund. I will have the opportunity to speak, but let me end by telling you that I've been at the origin of the creation of the Green Climate Fund. My country, Mexico, was the first to put the proposal on the table, and it's really a pleasure to see how you have evolved and grow, and I hope you continue to grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and you introduced very fluently Yannick Glemarek, who is the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, and we will have the last but not least introductory remark.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At the onset, I would like to thank the government of France for hosting the first replenishment conference of the Green Climate Fund, and thanks the One Planet Summit founders for co-organizing with the Green Climate Fund this event on scaling up blended finance. And I would like to thank all of you for joining this event, including my good friend Naoko Ishii from the Global Environment Facility. There is a paradox at the heart of climate finance. In theory, we should have enough money to finance every single commercially viable projects to facilitate a rapid transitions toward low emission and climate resilient development in the world, with more than $130 trillion being managed by institutional investors. In practice, very little is happening, notably in least developed countries. When a project developer in a developing country tries to get access to any kind of finance, basically they are being pushed from one place to another place to another place, and they can never access any kind of finance. And whenever they can access finance, they access finance with very, very short tenor, an extremely high interest rate, and what in principle should have been a commercially viable project suddenly is a highly unattractive project because the cost of financing is simply too high, especially for clean climate investment, which tend to have high upfront costs for low operation and maintenance costs. But if you ask the institutional investors, they tell you, we are committed to this transition toward low-emission climate-resilient development. We have set aside some money. We cannot find any bankable project. And so if there is one thing that my career has taught me over the past 30 years is that there is no lack of attractive, viable projects in developing countries. However, almost every single project I've ever worked on sooner or later will basically run into trouble. You will not have enough money to wrap up the feasibility study, or you will not have enough money for the bid bond to try to get a power purchase agreement, or a government that was supposed to pass one piece of legislation that was making your project possible suddenly is not passing this legislation. Or you have been, for the past 3 years, trying to get your sitting license and you can't get it. And so almost every single project I've ever worked with, sooner or later, doesn't matter how attractive they are to run into trouble. And the missions of the Green Climate Fund is to make sure that these attractive projects, do not die. or we are a fairly unique creature in the sense that we can work with anybody, and we are capital agnostic, if I can use this expression that I borrow from Jennifer Norris. We can provide any kind of grant and non-grant instrument. For us, what is important is to make sure that this project sees the light of the day. So if the project proponent are in need of equity finance, we will provide equity finance. If the project proponents are in need of concessional loans, we will provide concessional loans. If it's grant for policy development, we will do it. So we start from the needs of our partners. And I'm extremely pleased to see here today a number of our partners. And for example, with EBRD, we were involved in the development of what is the largest solar park in the world, in Bempan, in Egypt. And there what we provided was, if memory is correct, was $9 million for the government of Egypt to be able to design the power purchase agreement that will be fair to the Egyptian ratepayer, but also fair to the investors. And because the hurdle rate was still not reached, we also provided concessional finance. But we are also working with EIB, where we are providing first loss equity capital for investing in the capital of SMEs. And this will enable them to get access to other finance. With World Bank, there are some projects where we provide guarantee. There are some projects where we provide concessional finance. There are some projects where we provide equity. And it's very much depend on what makes sense. And with Conservation International, we have used different type of instruments. And so we now have a number of models that works. One of the challenges is to basically scale up these models and making sure that what has worked in one country will work in 100 countries in the coming years. There is another challenge that we have when it comes to blended finance is that in some cases we do not have models that work, and we have to invent these new models. I had the opportunity to discuss with Deputy Prime Minister Mark Brown from Cook Island. Their concessional finance for small island development state is not the solution, because you will create additional debt distress. So we have to invent a completely new type of blended finance. And I'm delighted to have this event today, because it's exactly what we are trying to do, to make sure that we come with solutions in order to scale up what works and to invent a different way to addressing new issues. Thank you very much.
Warm applause. Because the message is very clear. There are some projects, and we are here today to make them live. And everybody is here for that. And maybe especially Werner Hoyer, who is the president of the European Investment Bank, who was the first to issue a climate bond so many years ago, 12 years ago, I guess. Okay, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and you will not be surprised that I say I have nothing to contradict to those I've just listened to. So I can limit myself to a few remarks. I must say, when you listen to the challenges that we have ahead, one might get a little bit depressive, because the volumes of these challenges seem to be simply unsurmountable. On the other hand, I stand here today more optimistic than ever, because for us in Europe, at least, things have changed dramatically this very year. We have a recent opinion poll showing that 93% of the Europeans consider climate change a serious problem, a big problem, big problem. 78% say it is a very serious problem. This awareness of the problem was not there even 12 months ago. And then we have seen the movements on the streets this year, millions of people taken to the street, and reminding political and business leaders that are too slow to react to the climate crisis that they have to do something, that they finally must also walk the talk. Their protests have spearheaded change in elections across Europe, and they are writing the sustainable, inclusive growth story that is long overdue. So, reason to be optimistic. This change is challenging the essence of our economic activities. As Mark Carney recently said, firms that ignore the climate crisis will go bankrupt. Nothing more, nothing less. It follows that those economies that do not sufficiently adapt will fall behind. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us in this room are united around the belief that more must be done. The historic Paris Accord set the direction of travel, but procrastination has tempered our ambitions, and business as usual is a powerful deterrent to changing behavior. We need an alliance of those willing to make a difference, and for those reasons I this reason, I wholeheartedly support the One Planet Coalition and all those partners from the public and private sectors who work together to bring about a change. And I'm particularly grateful to La République Française and the President de la République for taking the initiative so forcefully. We know that the One Planet approach aims to be global, strategic, and transformational, that commitments are expected to be followed by real action and regular progress reports, and we know that the aim is to generate new business models in climate, oceans, and biodiversity. I'm standing in front of you today to make clear commitments on behalf of the EU Bank to do just that. We deliver global, strategic, and transformational investments in the climate, oceans, and biodiversity. We will position EIB as an incubator for climate finance and expertise to mobilize others, helping our societies and economies transform to a low-carbon future. And we'll be accountable through regular reports of our progress and impact. Well, with about 150 billion of climate action and environment lending since 2012, the EIB Group is already the largest multilateral provider of finance for projects supporting climate action and other environmental objectives in the world. So we are not new to this. But I know we must be more ambitious. We need to develop new markets and new products, like we did with the green bonds, indeed, 12 years ago. And this experience has shown us how important it is to have a taxonomy, how to offer things to investors which are reliable, sustainable, and provide also accountability for what we are doing. These activities are not bureaucratic, they are key for success and credibility. We have listened to the calls from President Macron in March, as well as the wishes of the European Council and President-elect Ursula von der Leyen to be more ambitious. And during my speech at the General Assembly last month, I highlighted our new ambition. These rest on three pillars. First, we aim to align all EIB Group's financing activities with the principle and goals of Paris Agreement by the end of 2020. All activities. As an important first step, we will include phasing out energy projects that depend solely on fossil fuels. I think this is key. For commercial bankers, this is not a surprise idea, to be honest. I talked to some of them yesterday in Milano, and they said, why should we do that? We know that if we do that today for the next 10 years, we are going to sit on stranded assets very, very soon. So from simply professional banking point of view, that's not the wisest decision if some political desirability must be there. Second, we aim to increase EIB financing for climate and environment to 50% by 2025. And third, by working with our public and private partners and developing innovative business models, we aim to unlock at least 1 trillion euro of investment by 2030. These are ambitious goals, and we need to work a lot on this. It will entail organizational changes within our group, but we will be ready. We must appreciate that climate change, mitigation, and adaptation also constitute a burden, and that burden is not equally distributed. We must take into account the situation in those countries who might be affected most by change, by transformation of energy sources. And therefore, it will be important to facilitate a just transition for those facing the greatest challenge. We will need to support growth and jobs in these regions. Failure to do so would weaken Europe's sustainable growth, but also the strength of the European project. And we have learned a lot in the last couple of years. Internally in the European Union, we have learned from the Juncker Plan, from the simple transformation of a limited amount of budget money from grants and subsidies to a guarantee facility. And something similar is needed now for development and for climate. So just let us learn the lessons from what we have experienced in Europe over the last years. Thank you very much.
We have to learn for the next lessons, and the burden will be not shared for everybody at the same rate. So that's linked to our next the first panel with Nick Stern. But I call the panelists the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the Cook Islands, Mark Brown, Lord Nick Stern, sorry to have called you Nick Stern. Sir, dear sir, could you come? You are now the grantor of the One Planet Lab, chair of the ESRC Center for Climate Change, Economics and Policy. So please have a seat. And Naoko Ishii, you will, okay, no problem. Naoko, come with me. You are the CEO of the Global Environment Facility, which has some lessons to give about how it works blended finance. So, Nick Stern, first, you can draw to us the landscape, which is quite an alert.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to the One Planet Summit. I've been working from the beginning as one of the trois garants for the One Planet Lab, working with Brune and her team, and I've been a fan and supporter of the Green Climate Fund for a long time, and very happy to see it doing so well. I want to say two things in my 5 minutes. The first is the economic story of growth and the urgency of action, and that it covers the whole waterfront. The second is how we really can scale up the finance for these investments if we use the right structures. So the economic story first. We understand the urgency. I don't have to repeat it for this audience. We have to reduce the emissions per unit of output by 80 or 90% in 2 decades. That's a very big change. Net zero means the whole economy. So we have to change the whole economy. But the good news is that this is the dynamic, sustainable, inclusive growth story of the 21st century. This doesn't sacrifice growth. It drives growth, and it drives growth that can last and can take us all forward and offer tremendous amount of jobs. For that to happen, ministers of finance, ministers of economy have to be in the lead. And not some grudging recognition of something that's necessary. Positive, dynamic, enthusiastic leadership. That is what we're beginning to see. I'm happy to say that France is a good example of that, and I'm sure it'll get even better. I hope I can say the same thing of my own country. As Axel said, we had the 50 finance ministers in the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Climate Action. We have 43 countries in the network for greening the financial system. And finally, they're not just there, but they're actually positive and enthusiastic and a little bit of competing with each other, and good. We need more of that. So this is a story then that's of fundamental importance right across the whole economy. It is a growth story. That doesn't mean it's easy. It involves good policies, and it involves strong investment, and it involves innovation. So let me turn to the second part of what I want to say, which is how we pull all this through. Now, there is no shortage of wonderful projects, and there's no shortage of finance. The challenge is to pull through these potential projects into real investment programs. And the challenge is to bring the right kind of finance in the right place at the right time. But we can do that. So how do we do that? And I'm going to just set out very briefly the 4 elements which we shared with President Macron, which he supported very strongly in our work in the One Planet Lab. So the first thing is the policy framework that pulls through those investments. You know what it looks like. It means carbon prices. It means stopping subsidizing fossil fuels. It means the right kind of regulation, the right kind of design of cities, and so on. With those, they've got to be clear and strong and lasting. Then we can pull through those investments. The second part is that since this is a story of investment across the whole economy, it's a story mostly of private investment. And it's a story mostly of private finance for those investments. And that means you have to move the whole financial system. You have to remove the obstacles. That's what the Network on Greening the Financial System is all about. You have to bring transparency and regulation. That's what the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure is all about. You have to create the right kind of platforms. The VERT was an example which came through the One Planet Lab. That will accelerate the whole financial system. Number 3, you have to align the multilateral development banks and the development finance institutions behind sustainability and climate. Everything has to be sustainable. Not that climate has this fraction in my portfolio. The whole portfolio has to be sustainable. We had a very strong, powerful, important statement which Suma Chakrabarti gave at the UN Climate Summit last month in 23rd of September. That was very powerful. We also had a very strong statement from the International Development Finance Club, which President Macron also underscored in a very powerful way. So we are seeing with the multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, the IDFC, we're seeing good, strong movement. Finally, this is the last part, we need the 100 billion. I was involved at the beginning of the 100 billion in 2009, working very closely with the Meles Zenawi, sadly no longer with us, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and Mike Froman and Hillary Clinton. And between us, we negotiated the 100 billion. Meles and I wanted it all to be public. That's another story. Somebody inserted public and private. That's where we are. And we have clear understanding now how to measure the 100 billion. And that is something that's moving. The crucial point I wanted to emphasize within that 100 billion is the concessional funds. Concessional funds allow the first loss provision that we already heard about. They allow the political risk guarantees. They allow the early stage equity. Infrastructure investment, a lot of this is infrastructure investment, is risky at the early stages. The presence of the concessional money with the GCF, with the EBRD, as Suma will tell us, with the EIB, the presence there reduces risk itself because a trustworthy bit of a buffer between sort of potentially governments that mess around with the policy environment. You provide a buffer, EIB, EBRD, GCF. You bring the confidence and you bring the right kind of instrument for those early stages. So within that 100 billion, the concessional finance story is important. That's why, particularly here, we salute the Green Climate Fund and I hope celebrate tomorrow. A little bit of work for one or two of you to do more between now and tomorrow, but we celebrate the Green Climate Fund's its replenishment tomorrow. So thank you all very much. Thank you again, One Planet Summit and Green Climate Fund. It's a privilege to be with you. There are some slides for this, which Thibaut Demonlay will circulate tonight or tomorrow. I wasn't allowed to use the slides. I would have done because I'm a professor, but never mind. You'll get them very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. There are some good news. There are many things who are on their way, but we need to scale up billions. And so, Mark Brown, you heard Sir Stern. What kind of problem meet Cook Island and small island developing states? And what type of action have you been able to launch so far, and what are your main concerns? Remember, short intervention, but very strong words.
Okay.
Strong words, short time.
I think this year, okay. Well, yes, with my 5 minutes, I'll confine my talk to financial matters. And I really like the banner as we came in, changing the rules of finance. And that's basically what I'll be talking about. To give you some context, a lot of you probably don't know where the Cook Islands is. The easiest way to explain it is it's between Fiji and Tahiti. Everybody's heard of those two countries. We're in the middle. But to give you an idea, my country is 2 million square kilometers in size. It's 99.99% ocean. If the capital island was here in Paris, my southern island would be near London. My northern island would be near Sicily. That's the scope and distance that we deal with in the Pacific. We are preparing to live in a 1.5 degree world. So that means for us building resilience. Physical infrastructure resilience, but also fiscal resilience. So we're busy sealing runways to counter sea surge. We're building strengthening ports in each of these communities. And it doesn't matter if you're building a runway for 1,000 people or for 50,000 people. The cost is still the same. So for us, the unit cost is very, very high. This makes finance very important for us. And for countries with microeconomies like ours, blended finance in particular, climate finance is very, very important. And to this end, I think with the replenishment of the GCF, I really applaud the countries that have made the commitment, but also in doubling their commitments. France, the UK, Germany, Japan, and others. For us, that is very, very pleasing to hear. The funding modality for countries like ours must be grant funding. as mentioned by Lord Stern. However, increasingly, countries like ours are being asked to borrow to build physical infrastructure. Now, we didn't warm the ocean, we didn't put plastic in the ocean, but we're being asked to protect ourselves by borrowing from those countries who are the biggest emitters. And to me, that's not right. Today, if I was to cast a climate lens over our national budget, you would see that we would spend up to 16% directly on adaptation and mitigation measures of our own money. So we're doing our bit. Next year, our target for 100% renewable energy is on track. If we are to borrow, we support the call for non-traditional terms and conditions. We've heard the call for 100-year terms, 0% interest. And I think that is something that we should seriously consider. This is what changing the rules is all about. Because climate change took place over generations. So to counter it, it will take many generations. This borrowing changes the debt profile for our countries. And it's even worse for those countries that are already in debt distress. So we need to change the rules around borrowing. 4 years ago, working with the Asian Development Bank, we developed a new product for the bank, which was a contingent line of credit. In the event of hurricane, storm, we can draw down immediately $10 million for recovery, rebuild. But that contingent line of credit is reflected in our balance sheet. It's a liability that we haven't used yet. What we would like to do is have that liability reflected in someone else's balance sheet, or a new balance sheet, maybe a global balance sheet of liabilities for adaptation and mitigation. But take it off our books because it makes our debt profile worse. So that's a challenge, again, changing the rules to the financial institutions. Maybe you can create a profile for debt that is not reflected on national balance accounts, but on a global balance sheet. Last week, the biggest contracting company in my country came to me and said they had a problem. We have awarded them a contract for some work. Part of the condition of that contract is they must have insurance. They cannot get insurance now. The insurance company that we deal with contacted them and said, the underwriters, the reinsurance companies are pulling out of the Cook Islands. We cannot get insurance. So now we have to change our rules and award these contracts without the need for insurance. Currently, while we are building and strengthening infrastructure, we now have to look at financial architecture, creating some form of insurance tailored to suit our country. So we're changing the rules, and I think our financial institutions, as you say in your banner, need to change the rules. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, you really have to do, because if I can summarize, the question is, do we have to pay for your mess in a way? And it's our money right now. So it's always difficult, no? Now, Koichi, to come back, to come after that. You are the chairperson, which is not chairwoman, I guess, of the Global Environmental Facility. So you are here to explain to us how does it work, blended finance, and what is your experience about that on green finance?
Thank you so much, the Balloon and Yannick, of having me at this very important event. Like many of you, I was in New York 3 weeks ago, and I have 2 takes away from that important week. Number one, that we face the huge the needs of massive transformation to the system, which is that that the entire economic system model needs to be transformed. But the second thing is exactly what the Balloon already mentioned. We can't really address the climate challenge, climate crisis, without addressing the nature, because that the biodiversity loss, land regulation, ocean issue, and climate change are really coming from the same driver, which is basically massive human economic pressure on the limited capacity of Earth system. So that in order for us to really take on that challenge, we need an integrated and comprehensive and the holistic solution to this challenge, and knowing that hoping that Yannick will get quite good money tomorrow. I think that I would like to confine my talk to how the GF and the GCF can really work together to address those massive challenges. That, as you may know, that the GF has is actually served for the multiple conventions, not only climate convention, but also biodiversity and land degradation, and then a few of my bosses are here, so that we have a kind of role to address the integrated approach to the global environmental challenges. While that I understand from Yannick and also replenishment process, that the GCF can do a lot of things, but one of your strengths is to be an amplifier, or how do you call that, an accelerator. So I am convinced that working together between the GCF and the GF, we can really produce a very synergistic solution to this massive challenge that human history is facing. The good news is that we are already working that talk that 2 weeks ago in Washington, that our technical team of the GCF and the GF actually met and explore what kind of concrete opportunities will be emerged based on our own complementarity. And I just want to share with you 2 examples we have explored. I mean, our technical team explored. The number one is actually the Amazon, that we, the GF, together with many of the partners in this room, have been investing in Amazon or working for the sustainability of the Amazon for the last 25 years. Our starting point is to basically establish the comprehensive protected areas in the region. But then after the building blocks of those investments, we have actually moved to the new phase that which brings the 7 Amazon countries together, and not only the national government, but also the state and the local government, to come up with the most collaborative governance structure. And so that they can address not only this the protection area agenda, but also that how we can create the space for sustainable development and livelihood. So that this phase is now becoming more matured. So that I think that we could accept, or they can accept, a much more financial resources to scale up what has achieved for the last 25 years of the engagement. But in that framework, I think it's very, very important that for new funds be actually respecting the principle and framework which was established over the last 20 years of engagement. I'm finishing in one example because you asked about the blended finance. This example is actually the one concrete idea that how the GF and the GF can work together. That the GF's innovation is also in this area of the blended finance, not necessarily energy area, but it's where we can do the blended finance to leverage the private investment in ocean, in agriculture, and in nature itself, which where the private sector money is much more scarce. Our role is to basically de-risk through guarantee and equity, but also provide funds for capacity building to bridge the project preparation and investment. LDN fund, I know that there are quite a number of people working in this LDN fund here, Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, that we started with 2 million of capacity building. Now it's coming that the more and more. The LDN fund announced in September that they have reached 150 million of the investment from private sector, and I am very happy to hear that that GCF is the new investor to LDN fund. Our history shows that our 100 million, the GEF, this private sector blend finance window, achieved 1.8 billion of investment. So our co-financing ratio is 1 to 18. I am pretty sure that by working together, we can create more and more and more of those and very innovative blended finance. All in all, I think that we, GEF and GCF, are very good start that not only working together, but creating the action involving many of other actors, so that with that, I am ready, we are ready to move forward to take this action together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So you are ready also to come back to join your seats. Thanks very much, because we are now on the first thema. We will have three. One of them will be the land degradation. But before that, framework and partnership to finance sustainable infrastructure. So to introduce this part, because this session, please come to the floor. Sir Suma Chakrabarti, you are the president of the EBRD, and you will introduce this key issue of infrastructures. So, sorry.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I almost dare not speak after Nick, really, because he taught me everything I knew in this subject, but he also set out the challenge, the urgency of it. I think we all know that sustainable infrastructure, which is what this panel is about, is critical, and we know that huge investments are required, and it's going to be a challenge to finance it in the right way. According to the latest projections, 70% of the increase in future emissions of greenhouse gases will originate in infrastructure, which is still to be constructed. So if we want to achieve the Paris climate targets, we've got to make sure that such future infrastructure is sustainable, and we've only got a decade to turn things round. At the summit in New York, we also heard confirmation that the world expects development institutions like mine to join forces and take a lead to address this challenge. In this letter that we got from the Ministers of Finance of France, Qatar and Jamaica, who lead the climate finance track, they praised the significant increase in climate finance achieved by the MDBs since COP21, but they also rightly called on us to do much more. Provide more climate finance, more support to our countries of operations in developing their nationally defined contributions. And we responded. We responded to the Ministers' call at the Climate Action Summit with our joint MDB statement committing the MDBs to 5 actions. More climate finance for sure from the MDBs, higher finance mobilisation from the private sector, more transparent reporting, helping our clients to deliver on the Paris Agreement goals, and supporting them in shifting away from fossil fuels. Now, all of these actions, frankly, require us to work even more in partnership. And one of these partnerships is especially important, the partnership with the Green Climate Fund. The ministers urged us, I think rightly, to strengthen our partnership with the GCF. In fact, we at the EBRD would already established a very strong operational relationship with the GCF. We've demonstrated together how the GCF can be a catalyst, yes, a catalyst for transformational investment in sustainable infrastructure. GCF, of course, has very productive relationships and partnerships with many other institutions too. And I want to congratulate Yannick and his team on allocating $5.2 billion of climate finance. And we, at the EBRD, $830 million of that has been allocated to us, which we're actively dispersing. And I'm very proud, in fact, because it's not just allocations matter, disbursements matter. And EBRD has now dispersed half of all GCF funds that have been dispersed so far. We've had great successes together. Yannick mentioned the great solar park in Egypt. We were having an argument on the train as to whether it was the largest solar park in the world. You've solved it for us. It is. Great. And it's been supported by $64 million of GCF concessional finance. Fantastic. A framework for renewables in Kazakhstan and a climate-resilient hydropower plant in Tajikistan, all because of the GCF. And now I think the GCF is also actively supporting our trademark Green Cities program too. So thank you, Yannick. How do we together then achieve this great boost in financing, which we, the MDBs, have committed to? I think there's one condition, one opportunity, and one challenge. The condition, Nick mentioned it, policy reform. And this title, the title of the next panel, mentions frameworks. MDBs are in a really good position to engage on policy and back it up with investment. So we've got to help governments create the right frameworks on the ground. Several countries that we've worked with, from Egypt to Jordan to Kazakhstan, Mongolia, they now have viable renewables markets, a direct result of policy engagement by EBRD and the other MDBs. We also helped design the new PPP law in Kazakhstan. These new investment opportunities have been opened up because of policy engagement. The second opportunity is capital. There is a massive amount of capital around, up to $100 trillion, held by pension funds, insurance companies, and mature markets. That capital is seeking high returns, which emerging markets are really well placed to deliver. But PPPs in emerging markets can be risky. So in order to provide appropriate risk-return profiles, de-risking is absolutely vital. De-risking instruments have to be created. We've now successfully created de-risking products, including standby liquidity facility in partnership with MIGA and for the Turkish PPP market. Other partners, including the IFC, CEDA, AFDB, IADB, and the EU, they've also created their own targeted facilities. And building on this, we've now working together under the MDB Infrastructure Cooperation Platform. This is currently chaired by EBRD to create an effective risk mitigation or credit enhancement product which can be scaled up and replicated. And just before New York, just before that UN Climate Summit, EBRD issued the world's first ever climate resilience bond. I think with these new products, we can seize the opportunity and attract the capital required. And third, a challenge, actual projects. The shortage of bankable projects, the lack of institutional capacity in emerging markets are well known. Our collective MDB response has been to roll out a series of project preparation facilities over the last 5 years, the largest being the World Bank's Global Infrastructure Facility. The EBRD, EIB, and regional development banks are all working on this too, and together we've allocated some $800 million now to project preparation. Under our facility, the EBRD has already prepared 12 new PPPs and more than 50 sub-sovereign projects. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've only mentioned one condition, one opportunity, and one challenge which require us to work together. There are, of course, many more. I can only praise the hundreds of local private banks, our partners, which distribute billions to SMEs in nearly 30 countries for energy efficiency upgrades. It's also important to reconfirm that the G20 has also been a catalyst on the wider global debate on infrastructure. And it's worked collaboratively with the MDBs on an agenda to promote infrastructure as an asset class and the role of quality aspects within that agenda. But not all partnerships need to be global. Internally within EBRD, we've completely refashioned our bankers and others to create a sustainable infrastructure group, which now delivers nearly half of our investment. It unites many teams, energy, transport, municipal policy and investments. And what has happened now, it's got such synergy, is that this year our green economy financing is just under 50% of the total so far. This is a target we hadn't even invented yet, and we're already getting towards it. It's fantastic. But a lot more to do still. And I'm sure that even greater innovation will come from our existing and new partnerships, including, of course, a strong and well-replenished GCF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Je vais parler en français puisque je vous rappelle que c'est une conférence qui a lieu en français et en anglais pour amener sur la scène, appeler sur scène le prochain panel qui va être modéré par Alsbeta Klein et qui va accueillir le ministre des Mines et des Énergies de la République togolaise, Marc Abidamon, Nasser Kamel qui est le secrétaire général de l'Union pour la Méditerranée, Constance Sacha qui dirige qui est en charge pour BNP de la corporate, du CIB en fait, en bon français, et Craig Coggett qui est le CEO of Pegasus Capital, le tout aussi en franglais, mais je pense que vous avez compris, d'autant plus que c'est sur l'écran. Donc, juste avant de vous laisser la place et vous voulez... Tout va bien? Oui. On va faire une alternance homme-femme, voilà, tout va bien. Donc on va regarder une vidéo qui va vous permettre d'introduire le sujet qui va les amener, eux, à parler évidemment infrastructure d'énergie, qu'elle soit solaire ou de vent.
Solar technology is revolutionizing the power sector. Solar is cheap, clean, and is a strong ally for countries to fight climate change, promote energy security, bolster universal access to electricity, keep pace with growing electricity demand, and foster local and industrial development. To achieve these objectives, the world needs more solar deployment than ever. But more solar requires more funding, and some countries lack the conditions they need to attract private capital. Governments need to tackle key challenges to enable private investments. How do we get there? To support governments, several organizations working with climate finance institutions have joined forces to develop a one-of-a-kind approach. The Solar Risk Mitigation Initiative. This initiative supports countries in developing sustainable solar programs to attract private investments and reduce reliance on public finances. This unique approach combines technical assistance for enabling environment and robust procurement, public critical investments for variable renewable energy integration, and tailored risk mitigation instruments, all to reach the goal of achieving sustainable private investments. To complement the initiative, 2 products are made available. First, a solar deployment guide for governments that outlines the key steps to develop a sustainable roadmap from challenges to solutions. Second, a secure and customizable online tendering platform that will support transparent and competitive bidding processes, helping to increase visibility and drive down prices. With the support of donors and other stakeholders, SRMI can fast-track our progress to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Join us as we help developing countries achieve their sustainable solar targets, attract affordable private investments, and address the climate urgency of the world.
Great. Thank you for this wonderful cue of a video for our panel called Framework and Partnerships for Financing Sustainable Infrastructure. I'm delighted to be here with this strong and mixed gender panel. Welcome to everyone. And I'd like to start with His Excellency, Minister Abli Bidamon, who is a Minister of Energy in Togo. Minister Abli Bidamon has a very long career in both public and private sector and has worked for Togo Telecom, Togo Customs, and currently also represents Lomé initiatives on solar. So, Mr. Minister, by the way, Mr. Minister will be talking in French, so for those of you who need translation, you should have your headphones on your seats. So, Mr. Minister, we just saw this excellent solar initiative. Tell us more about it and tell us what is needed to enable the environment to scale up solar.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. Mesdames et Messieurs les panélistes, chers invités, Mesdames et Messieurs à vos rangs, grades et tout protocole respecté, je voudrais avant toute chose adresser mes remerciements à l'ensemble des organisateurs de cette rencontre et surtout à Madame la secrétaire d'État qui a bien voulu effectivement nous adresser l'invitation. Je voudrais vous remercier aussi, vous tous ici présents, et vous dire combien je suis très heureux, très honoré d'être parmi vous et surtout de prendre la parole en ce moment très crucial où le monde entier a besoin de réflexions et d'actions concrètes pour faire face aux changements climatiques. Avant de parler effectivement de l'initiative de Lomé, comme vous l'avez indiqué, Madame la modératrice, je voulais tout simplement vous dire que le Togo, petit pays de 8 millions d'habitants, mais grande nation en termes d'ambition, a lancé un ambitieux projet de promotion des énergies renouvelables. Pourquoi? Parce que nous avions la ferme conviction que la lutte contre le changement climatique est une nécessité absolue et que chaque pays doit contribuer à cela à sa manière. Et le Togo, en faisant la promotion des énergies renouvelables, pense effectivement porter sa modeste contribution à cette lutte que nous devons tous engager. Mais effectivement, le gouvernement togolais en est conscient que la promotion des énergies renouvelables ne doit pas être un acte isolé seulement du gouvernement togolais, mais plutôt un acte partagé avec tout le monde. C'est pourquoi son Excellent Monsieur le Président de la République togolaise a, en concertation avec ses pairs du Bénin, du Burkina, du Niger, du Mali et du Gabon, a lancé une initiative dite initiative de Lomé qui vise à favoriser, comment l'appelle-t-on, la mise en place d'un cadre permettant de financer et de déployer de façon massive les énergies renouvelables. Donc, cette initiative est née de la volonté politique de 6 chefs d'État qui ont décidé de conjuguer les efforts pour pouvoir effectivement faire face au financement très crucial des énergies renouvelables de façon générale, mais l'énergie solaire en particulier. Donc, cette initiative, je le dis très clairement, a reçu le soutien de la France, de l'Inde et de l'Alliance solaire internationale. Je précise que l'Alliance solaire internationale est issue de l'accord de Paris sur le changement climatique. Donc l'objectif de l'initiative de Lomé, c'est, comme je viens de le dire, de mettre en place un cadre qui favorise l'investissement dans l'énergie solaire. Donc, ce cadre doit être élaboré avec tous les acteurs, les gouvernements, le secteur public, le secteur privé, les développeurs, les banquiers, les institutions de garantie, pour être sûr que les attentes des uns des autres sont prises effectivement en compte. Donc, cette mobilisation en termes de chiffres, c'est de pouvoir très rapidement mobiliser plus d'1 milliard de dollars pour les 6 pays pour faire avancer tous les projets que chaque pays effectivement a, mais de façon agrégée pour que ça soit in fine un projet commun des 6 pays dont ils vont faire face, ils vont effectivement demander ensemble le financement. Donc, in fine, l'initiative de Lomé va permettre de dérisquer les investissements, de pouvoir attirer le secteur privé dans ce secteur crucial, parce que c'est vrai, beaucoup l'ont dit avant nous, que les investissements, la plupart des investissements ne vont pas en Afrique. Nous pensons que cette initiative qui va regrouper, c'est vrai, au départ, les 6 pays dont j'ai donné la liste, mais au-delà de la phase pilote, l'objectif aussi, c'est de pouvoir intégrer les autres pays d'Afrique comme l'ensemble des pays qui font partie de l'Alliance solaire internationale. Donc la question est, où est-ce qu'on en est concrètement aujourd'hui dans le cadre effectivement de cette initiative? Donc après le sommet fondateur de l'Alliance solaire internationale en mars 2018, les 6 chefs d'État se sont concertés et d'ailleurs même ont publié une tribune pour réaffirmer leur volonté de pouvoir se mettre ensemble pour faire face à ce défi. Donc avec l'appui de la France, dont je salue au passage l'action, à travers l'Alliance française, l'Alliance française de développement, l'AFD, la France a donné un appui financier à ces 6 pays et un consultant a été recruté. 2 ateliers ont déjà eu lieu. Le premier à Lomé, le deuxième à Ouagadougou. Et le consultant doit effectivement présenter son rapport à la fin du mois de novembre. Donc les prochaines étapes, c'est effectivement de pouvoir lancer la discussion autour du rapport, de voir comment on pourra mettre ce cas supranational pour les 6 pays, comment pouvoir le mettre en place et trouver un consensus pour que, effectivement, ce cadre, on puisse non seulement le lancer, mais que les 6 pays s'engagent effectivement à pouvoir appliquer les dispositions qui sont contenues dans ce cadre. Voilà très rapidement un peu l'idée ou l'esprit de l'initiative de Lomé.
Fantastic.
Donc je reste à votre disposition si tant est qu'il y a d'autres questions.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. And we'll come back to you in a second round, but I'd like to highlight 3 things that the Minister mentioned, which is the political will, and obviously there was a lot of political will to make it happen, aggregation and de-risking. And those are the 3 things that really make it happen. So I'd like to move on to our next panelist, Constance Charchat, who is a head of company engagement at BNP Paribas Bank, and she is also spearheading all the sustainable finance activities. So Constance, you have heard Mr. Minister to talk about solar and International Solar Alliance. So how is your work in solar, and how is actually your work on sustainable infrastructure? What are you financing? What are the issues? What are you doing as a bank? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, as a leader in financing of renewable energy in the EMEA, we've been financing a wide range of projects, and it goes from 1.1 gigabyte Sweihan solar farm in the UAE to much smaller blended finance projects in developing countries. And basically, I think you were asking for actionable insights. I think we see three ways to make de-risking really actionable. The first one is blended finance. Second one is blended usage and beneficiary. And third one is favoring smaller scale projects. So blended finance, we've done anything from co-investing with the AFD to true blended finance. And I think what we feel is what works best is when each actor brings a real complementary benefit, which means for DFI and international agency, it's de-risking and longer tenor. For export credit agencies, it's guarantees and insurances. Foundations and impact fund, we believe they should bring, and they could bring a lot more, especially to ECA tranches where they have a high percentage of local cost versus equipment. There's, of course, the government grants, and then once you've de-risked and once you have financed a longer tenor, I think then you can attract the private capital, pension funds, asset owner. It doesn't need to be green funds. And you can attract up to a private wealth management. So for me, it's a matter of making sure that we don't compete and that each actor brings a complementary benefit. Second way of de-risking is blending usage. So we do believe that when the beneficiaries of the infrastructure can combine bankable corporates together with population, you are able to turn a country risk into a corporate risk. And we had an example co-financing with IFC. We co-financed a solar farm in Burkina Faso. And we were able to finance it because basically we considered that an Australian company, which had a good credit rating, was the main beneficiary and was going to be a captive beneficiary. So there, by blending usage and blending beneficiary, you de-risk. And then my last point really on how to de-risk is favoring small size projects. We believe today that technology allows to move from almost no infrastructure to small scale, extremely efficient infrastructure. So you can skip the grid and very heavy projects. And we do believe with those small scale projects that there's less stakeholder, so less stakeholder management, lower project costs. Many of those local infrastructure can also be not necessarily connected to the grid. So that means also lower cost. And those all in all lower costs allow for more agile, more efficient acceleration of implementation of renewable infrastructure.
So, Constance, what I pick up from here, it's actually interesting because we hear a lot about sustainable infrastructure and how it has to be large and at a very large scale. But what you are bringing here is that actually we have to have both. We have to have smaller projects, and we probably through technology can enable that. The other thing that you brought up here, which we haven't heard from other speakers, is bringing in other partners, partners who perhaps do not care about commercial returns on capital. You mentioned foundations, and this session is about partnerships. And I think we all need to do a bit more to actually get there. So I have one more question for you before we move to the next speaker. You have a good example of managing blended finance and bringing in corporate sector. And I think it was a French company that you brought in. Maybe you can share this example with us.
Yeah, so within BNP Paribas CIB, 50% of our clients are financial institutions, 50% are corporates. And basically for us, what works well is when blended finance can enhance the impact of corporates that are already engaged in sustainable economic growth. For us, the best example, and I'm sure Brune will like this, is the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility. So basically it was launched 2 years ago, and it was designed to be a finance tool to fight deforestation and stimulate rural jobs in Indonesia. And it brings a lot of different capabilities and expertise. So the UNEP, we have the World Agroforestry Center, we have a Hong Kong-based investment manager called ATM Capital, BNP Paribas, as well as WWF.
And what was super interesting,
you had everyone in it, right?
But then what was super interesting is Michelin was able to leverage on this facility. And what they wanted to do is, because they're a real pioneer in sustainable supply chain, they wanted to develop a new kind of rubber plantation that would replace areas that were touched by rampant deforestation. So basically, they came in and through plantation of high-yielding rubber trees, they're creating 16,000 jobs. They are turning lives into prosperity lives, and they are stimulating sustainable economic growth.
So I'm going to interrupt you here, but basically what we are seeing is that not only you've done something right for the nature, but you actually created jobs and you created something at scale, because I think substantial part of rubber from Michelin will actually come from that plantation.
Exactly. At the end, I think at the maturity, 10% of their supply chain for natural rubber will come from
This is a great solution of scale. So we are now going to move to the next speaker, and we have with us His Excellency Ambassador Nasser Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, and he had a long career in diplomacy, serving as Ambassador of Egypt both to the UK and France. His Excellency Ambassador Nasser Kamel, please tell us about what regions can do to scale up sustainable infrastructure in your current role.
Well, I will definitely speak in English, but je voudrais commencer par remercier la ministre, Madame Brune Poisson, de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui à cette réunion très importante. J'en suis sûr et certain, demain sera un grand succès pour le monde, dans le sens de votre exercice de, en français je ne connais pas le mot, replenishment of the fund. Ben écoutez, moi, je suis le chapitre régional un peu de SDG, et dans le sens climat. Il y a une semaine, a week ago, we presented to our foreign minister, because we work a lot on what we call science policy making interface. So, with the help of UNEP and several actors, including the European Commission, we helped create a group that did a groundbreaking study on climate change in the Mediterranean. And the results are overwhelming, quite alarming. We might be the second, there is a debate with the third most affected area by climate change. And by this is a call of action. As far as our region, it is for the whole world, but our region is definitely 10 of the most affected cities in the next 20 years are Mediterranean cities. 250 million Mediterranean will be water poor in the next few years. And I have so many examples that are quite alarming and shocking, but I don't want to waste my intervention. But I can share them with you, because the study is in our website, and it's quite alarming to that extent. So what do? Well, we bring the problem to the attention of the policymakers, but we also work on the financial dimension of the problem. So we keep alerting our financial institution to the business opportunity, but we also help our member states in working to get more international public finance. But they're good at it. Some are better than others, because our region gets 13% of the available fund when it comes to climate change, a region that has only 4.1% of the world population and 2.1% of the world GDP. But some of us are less good than the others. But when it comes to private finance, this is where we lack, and we're very much behind. And that's the importance of what you're doing here today. And that's what all the speakers before me, especially the IFCs, talked about. Well, of course, we need concessional funding, but we need also to make the business case. And I heard the prominent Mr. Stern talk about. The business case is there. And we have very clear examples. I don't want to be the one giving them. In São Paulo, when we turned from traditional lamps to renewable, to I don't know what they call them, but to the new generation lamps. in our region. Ban is a good example. Since I'm Egyptian,
commercial opportunity.
Yeah, it is a commercial opportunity. Well, I was in London when we launched our first feed-in tariff. I'm talking now as an Egyptian. And when I looked at the numbers, and I'm not an economist, by no means I am, it is today a profitable business to invest in. So in that case, we are helping our member states structure. We are helping IFCs and member states. We do matchmaking. And to finish my intervention, because I know time is short, we are engaging in an adventure that is definitely going to be successful with the region. I don't want to misspell your name. Yeah? With the region of climate change, R20, where they are creating, with the help of Green Climate Fund, a global fund in terms of impact investment, in terms of climate, water, renewable, hoping that this would be a first step towards creating a fund for the Mediterranean, in that sense, that will be profitable, and that the next wave, as it was said before, that investing in sustainable is a driver of economic growth.
It will be profitable and impactful. Thank you, Your Excellency. And that tees us up very well for our next intervention. We were supposed to have with us Craig Cogood, who is a CEO of Pegasus Capital. Pegasus Capital is a private equity fund and is one of the very few funds that have been accredited by GCF. Unfortunately, Craig could not be here in person, so we have about a minute and a half video teed up. Can we?
Yes, we are.
Après midi or bonsoir, as the case may be. Welcome, everybody. I'm sorry I cannot be there with you in Paris. I did want to say that people in the United States, despite what you may have heard, really do care about climate change and do understand that the risks to planet health, to human health, and to economic health require significant investment in climate infrastructure. And for that reason, I am thrilled to be working with the UN Green Climate Fund and the R20 on a project where we will focus on sort of mid-market, mid-level green infrastructure projects, roughly between $5 and $50 million, which the R20 has led in sourcing. I think this is an area where largely smaller projects find financing, larger projects find financing, but this vast arena of mid-level projects are absolutely crucial at the subnational and regional level to get done. What I think is so important to make this successful is, first of all, to help identify these projects and from reliable sources, and there the R20, working with its regional and subnational partners, has a tremendous list of projects, as well as we at Pegasus have projects that we are sourcing. Secondly, technical assistance and feasibility studies are absolutely crucial to sort through which projects are most shovel-ready and financeable. And there, too, I think the work done with the R20 is going to help us be most successful in partnering with the UN Green Climate Fund and others to achieve building fast and ultimately scalability. And thirdly, we need a blended finance model. And there the leadership of the Green Climate Fund is crucial as sort of an anchor investor, but then partnering with, I'm hopeful, US foundations, other climate-focused investors, all looking at different elements of risk and reward. We cannot, these projects, really start what will become a long-standing business model to invest in these projects, which will be relevant throughout the globe. And our initial thought is to, with our first fund, start with a number of countries and then ultimately come back with regionally focused funds. But this first fund will be focused on across regions to sort of show the best of the best. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and I look forward to being part of the solution going forward.
So this is from the private equity fund. We are running out of time, so we're going to do a very short second round, and I'm going to start with you, Your Excellency. If there was one thing that you can recommend to all of us to make it easier to access climate finance? What is it that we should all do so that it's easier to get to that concessional climate finance that we all talk about?
Well, actually, this is the road ahead. Pegasus, R20, and multilateral and governments working together to create the model, making it scalable. And once we have put the seed money, as far as the Green Climate Fund is, the project is automatically bankable, and it becomes the model. So we're talking about doing this 1,000 times. It is a job. It creates jobs. It creates growth. It creates profit. Sustainable is no longer a matter of development assistance. It's a matter of an economic model for the whole humanity.
This is the inclusive growth story of the 21st century that Lord Stern was talking about. From the perspective of a commercial bank, one thing that you could do to simplify access to climate finance?
I think way too often today, when we end up co-investing, it's by coincidence, not because there's a well-orchestrated project management. And making sure that on the ground, at an operational level, we have the right forum to be able to co-work. So instead of each of us looking at each project, deep dive, we collectively sit together and we say, okay, how we can bring together our strengths to finance an entire set of projects. I think this is what we're lacking today very often, and we need this.
By design, less happenstance. Mr. Minister, one thing that we can do to simplify access to climate finance.
Merci beaucoup. Comme beaucoup d'orateurs l'ont dit, je suis parfaitement d'accord avec eux. Je pense que aujourd'hui, je vais parler fondamentalement de l'Afrique. Je pense qu'il faut dépasser ce scepticisme qu'on a vers l'Afrique. Il y a des réformes qui ont été faites dans beaucoup de domaines, notamment dans le domaine de l'énergie. Il y a cette volonté politique à tous les niveaux pour que, comment dirais-je, les choses puissent effectivement se faire comme ça se doit. Donc, fondamentalement, ce qui a lieu aujourd'hui, c'est d'accompagner les pays africains, notamment dans le cadre de l'Alliance solaire internationale. Comme je l'ai dit, il y a déjà cette volonté politique de 6 chefs d'État de pouvoir conjuguer ensemble leurs efforts pour pouvoir mettre un cadre qui permettra effectivement de faire ce financement au niveau de ces 6 pays, mais au-delà de ces 6 pays, d'envisager effectivement l'entrée des autres dans ces dispositions que va contenir le cadre. Donc, aujourd'hui, investir dans l'énergie, surtout l'énergie renouvelable, c'est faire 2 choses. Notamment augmenter de façon substantielle la production de l'énergie qui manque cruellement. Je reviens encore sur l'Afrique. Si je prends comment l'appelle-t-on, l'exemple de l'Afrique, c'est effectivement aujourd'hui cette énergie manque. Si je prends l'Afrique subsaharienne, 2 Africains sur 3 n'ont pas accès à l'énergie. Si on investit dans ça, non seulement ça, on règle le problème de l'accès à l'énergie, mais surtout, on protège l'environnement et on crée aussi les conditions pour que les Africains restent effectivement dans leur propre pays et éviter tout le drame que l'on voit aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. So to sum it up from this panel, what we heard from before and here is that we have investors who have something around $100 trillion in assets that are currently yielding close to negative return. And what we have here is a scale of a problem described by Lord Stern. We have, which is enormous. We have some amount of blended finance, which Sir Suma told us we have to leverage as much as possible. So rather than giving it all away, we have to take a little bit of it and mix it with other sources of capital so that we can leverage that. And last but not least, as the minister described, we need to have enabling environment to make things happen. And what is it that we need to make happen? As you heard from the panel, we need to create projects, small and large, and small are also nice. They don't have to be large. We need to have the policy environment. And as Ambassador Kamel said, we need to have investors who are going to come in and, with the help of blended finance, de-risk that. Last but not least, I'll add to it from IFC's perspective. What would really help is to have an asset class where investors can come in and invest, and that asset is called sustainable infrastructure. We're sitting here today. Yesterday, the market reached $200 billion of green bonds for this year. That asset didn't exist 12 years ago. We have an opportunity to make it for sustainable infrastructure. So with this, I'd like to thank this esteemed panel, Ambassador Kamel, Constance Chacha, Minister Ali Limon. Thank you very much.
Thanks to our panelists. I have to remember to the other panelists that we have a rule that is just 5 minutes for each. And because we have two other panels right now. Two themes. The first one will be on adaptation action to deliver benefits on the most vulnerable issue. Brune Poisson mentioned the question of agriculture, the question of land degradation. That's why it's very important to welcome, to introduce this session, Ibrahim Thio, qui est le secrétaire général de la Convention des Nations Unies pour la lutte, contre la désertification. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister, thank you for inviting me to speak about how adaptation can deliver benefits for the most vulnerable. Let me try to speak about how much adaptation can provide benefits for all. My point is that adaptation is not a second-class project in climate. It is a first-class. So it is not only for the most vulnerable, it is for all. My second point is that adaptation and mitigation we should not continue to segregate these as if these were two pillars that were not meeting. And I will try to explain why we should be actually blending, to use that word, adaptation and mitigation. One of the first points that we need to understand is that in order to mobilize blended finance, we actually need to have a conceptual framework that would facilitate that blending of finance. Let me give you an example. Investing on land restoration is actually good for land, but land restoration provides food, provides water, protects biodiversity. Land restoration is also the best investments we can have now for climate, probably the cheapest, because as you restore land, you actually decarbonize the atmosphere and recarbonize the soil. So it's a multiple benefits. So investing on land restoration, as an example, is certainly one of the best solutions we have right now. So when Brune Poisson spoke about biodiversity and climate and the two conventions of climate and biodiversity, I wanted your attention because this point is extremely important for me. When you spoke about biodiversity and climate as two conventions that are important to the world, I wanted to remind you and remind everybody that is a third convention, which is the Convention to Combat Desertification, to conserve land, to protect land, and that is goal 15.15. And it is very important that we work in a very synergetic manner so that we protect the climate, we protect biodiversity, and the entry point for us is actually land restoration, mitigation, biodiversity, while at the same time responding to the needs of the poorest communities, as was mentioned, and Minister also spoke about energy. All of that is actually blended. And this is why when you bring these together conceptually, it is much easier to actually convince public and private to come together and blend their finance as well, because you will have multiple benefits with the same project. And I think that is what Constance also explained in that beautiful project of tropical forest land restoration, for which I'm very proud to see progress. Why there's more than that. Why is it important to also mobilize blending finance? Well, first, for adaptation, it makes economic sense. It makes financial sense. It's a business case that we need to have. Adaptation is not only about the form perdu somewhere that no one would benefit from. There is a business case for that. So it is extremely important that we mention this. Why I'm saying this, and that is my second point here, is that private finance so far on climate has been largely on mitigation. Very few private finance has been devoted to adaptation so far. So why is that? Because probably we have not made the business case so far for adaptation. And adaptation is considered as small project that will be devoted only to the poorest of the poor, hence the actually title of our own panel here. So, and my third point is to say that there are risks, of course, and it is very important to de-risk, as was mentioned before. And these climate risks are real. Therefore, when private investors come to work with small communities for agriculture, for commodities, and so forth, they should understand these risks. And there are many ways of de-risking this, and I think one of the panelists is actually from Mirova, and I'm very proud to say that the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, which was supported by the UN Convention to Combat Desertification with many of you, including the GEF and European banks, is now effective. So this is one of the ways of de-risking these investments. Very quickly, I will also mention some of the challenges, de-risking is one of the challenges. The other challenge is that most of the time, adaptation programs and mitigation programs, not only adaptation programs, but actually mitigation. I know a mitigation project in Eastern Africa that took at least 12 years to materialize. Long term, this is what I'm saying. It takes time to actually reap the benefits, to actually see the results. When you invest on land restoration or you invest on agroforestry projects, don't expect to have the results just 3 months later. So it's a long-term investment. And that is some of the challenges that the private sector will have to understand and just accept. And third and final point is that if you want this to succeed, you have to have very good partners that will be used as channels. One example we have in the Sahel, which is not the easiest region to work on adaptation projects, is to work with a UK-based company that is supporting 1,000 women from Ghana and Burkina Faso, collecting baobab, moringa, and probably soon other non-timber forest products of the Sahel, and taking them to European markets and creating the value chains so that a UK company working with a poor woman, one of the poorest and the most vulnerable, actually is creating a value chain which is profitable. And that company is actually selling now their products on Amazon. So it's a very good example where you can say from a very local activity, and I like the idea about small projects, not only big projects, that can make a big difference. So again, in closing, just to say that adaptation is an important element of our work. $250 billion have been invested in 2018 on mitigation, only $2 billion on adaptation. That has to change because adaptation is also one of the elements that we need to address, and certainly they would respond to multiple objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To talk about adaptation and fight against land degradation, now we have our next panel moderated by Leonardo Martinez-Diaz, who is a Global Director of Sustainable Finance at WRI, with Mr. Philippe Zawati, already mentioned, CEO of Mirova, Mrs. Margarita Astralaga, qui est la directrice de la division climat et environnement de l'IFAD, et Mrs. Dolika Banda, I come to French, which is my language. Dolika Banda, CEO of African Risk Capacity. So here you are. Just before leaving the floor to Leonardo, we have a video which explains very concretely what we can do to address water scarcity and agriculture in Morocco.
Thanks so much for being here for this part of the program. My name is Leonardo Martinez-Diaz. I'm the head of the Sustainable Finance Center at the World Resources Institute, and I'm extremely happy to be here, having spent 3 years on the board of the Green Climate Fund and worked with many of you to help bring that institution to where it is today. So for me, it's a huge pleasure to see it evolve and move into the next phase of its development. This is a panel on adaptation. And let me start with the hopefully not too provocative personal view that the success of the GCF will be judged in large measure by whether it's able to move the needle on adaptation. When folks look back from 2025, 2030 at the GCF and ask, did it really change the game? I think they'll be looking at adaptation more than anything when judging its success. And because of that, I've been asked to, before going to the panel, offer a couple of thoughts from the Global Commission on Adaptation. We at the WRI were happy to be part of that effort. The Commission, as some of you may know, released its report about a month ago, and it focused very much on the urgency of action in adaptation. If you want a quick headline, the headline is Resilience Pays. And the report made clear that the cost-benefit of investing in resilience and adaptation is extremely attractive. If you were to invest about $1.8 trillion in 5 different areas over a decade, the Commission estimated you would get about 7.1 trillion in net benefits. So almost a 3-to-1 ratio across many different sectors. The Commission also looked at the agriculture and food security area, which is one we will focus on and touch on this panel. And as you know, one of the key priorities is those 500 million smallholder farms that are about 2 acres or less around the world. They are the ones that are at great vulnerability from climate impacts. And of course, what folks are most concerned about is the impact of rising temperatures on yields and the growth in yields, and also the income that farmers can get for their crops. As a result, the Commission had a number of recommendations. I think the most important ones are, first of all, can we increase the productivity of smallholder farms through research and development, drought-resistant seeds, the use of technology to improve farming techniques. Very much a focus on can we help farmers manage the volatility and the risk of climate-related events through things like insurance, like access to financial services, like diversification of their crops so that they don't put all their seeds in one basket, if you will. And of course, a strong focus on policy. And here I would point to the fact that some interventions that help make farmers more resilient may also be good for mitigation, may also help reduce the carbon emissions from agriculture, which today account for about 1/4 of global emissions. So it is possible to do both. It is hard, but that's why we need entities like the GCF to help us pioneer that. Let me now move to the panel. We have a very nice blend of perspectives here. Let me start with you, Philippe. You run an asset management company that has very much focused on sustainable investing. You have invested in agriculture, in adaptation. And I want to ask you 2 things. We only have time for one pass, so I want you to think about 2 things in one sitting. The first is why adaptation? What has allowed you to both invest there and hopefully make some money in that space? And second, how do you see the GCF's private sector facility and its private sector engagement as helping contribute to this space?
Thank you, Leonardo. First, let me first start by thanking, Ibrahim Thio and Naoko Ishii for mentioning the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, which is the fund we have launched 1 year ago, but the story started, a couple of years ago at the inspiration of the UNCCD and Monique Barbu at that time. And the real beginning of this project was actually launched at the first One Planet Summit 2 years ago. Thanks to you, Brune, and the French government. This is a very interesting story because it's really blended finance. So we mix together public money and private money. to invest in sustainable agriculture and land restoration all over the world. So we have started to now to invest. We have some existing stories to show, existing investment to show, especially in Latin America, for example, in Peru, in coffee plantation, in Bhutan, hazelnut plantations, in very soon, hopefully in Africa, in Ghana and Tanzania with teak plantations. So all these, combining, of course, very high environmental and social impacts on the ground. So, of course, investing in this kind of project, there are some risks. Associated with this kind of investments, currency risk, country risk, the fact that investing in small projects with small farmers, there are a lot of credit risk for the investors, and so all these, of course, make it sometimes difficult for private investors to come into this space. So we need to manage this risk. Managing this risk is not only blended finance. Blended finance is one of the tools we use. But first, we have to find the good projects, and there are a lot. There are a lot of projects. I wanted to outline this fact. It's not only small holders. It's not only big projects at national level. In the between, there are a lot of small and medium businesses, some and medium entrepreneurs that are really, creating new economic models that needs to be accompanied to be helped to grow and to become at scale. So there are some good investments to do. This is the first way to lower the risk. The second way is to use the right tools in terms of financial tools, and we have these tools. We know. Project finance. All we have done the last 15 years in renewable energy is something that we can. Clearly do. That's the same on agriculture and adaptation. And then, on the top of this, when you have done all this, it remains some kind of risks that we cannot bear as investors, or at least that we cannot bear today, because we don't need blended finance forever. We need blended finance today to start. To ramp up all this, and so we need this public money to enter into this, and it was exactly what we have done with the LDN fund, with about 20 to 30% of the fund, which is brought by public institutions in junior shares in order to de-risk this. Then to come to your second question about the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, and I would maybe like to wider it a little bit the answer to speak about blended finance. Blended finance, we are all speaking about this. Of course, if we want it to grow, we need to have some track record on this to show that it works. So it's exactly a kind of proof of concept. It's what we try to do. But we also have to make it happen at a larger scale. And to do this, I have maybe one something to ask to public institution is, make it simpler. Make it simpler. It's sometimes too difficult, too long to deal with public institutions, and the transaction cost for private investors is too high today, and we need really to go faster. And this is the only thing we want. We are now Koichi mentioned that we have reached 150 million. That's big. That's nothing, compared to what we need. So now we have built around the LDN fund a platform to invest in natural capital. So we have also some investments in sustainable ocean businesses and an Amazon biodiversity fund as well. So it's about 400 million euros invested in natural capital. But what we want to do is to go to 1 billion very soon and much more. And to do this, we need today public money. The private money will come. It's coming. There are some institutional investors and insurance companies, pension funds, which are more and more interested. We have also to take the opportunity of the situation of the markets today and the low, very low interest rates, which, I mean, to a certain extent, is a very good opportunity because all these big institutions, insurance companies, and pension funds, they have to find new investments in order to invest and to I mean, capped yield in the long run, and so we have to also benefit from this.
Thank you so much. Margarita, your organization works in the field with governments to fight food insecurity, poverty, and hunger. And it's become sort of mainstream to say that we have to focus on the most vulnerable. But actually reaching the most vulnerable is hard. How are you doing this? And first, and then second, again, what kind of potential partnerships can the GCF and others bring to the table for you?
Thank you, Leonardo. Hello? Yeah. Thank you, Leonardo, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, for IFAD, of course, agriculture is our niche, and those 500 million families you were talking about are our niche and our mandate. And when we talk about development, we talk about the importance of food security. And sometimes we forget that it's 80% of smallholders that are, smallholders are the ones producing 80% of the food consumed in the developing world. So unless we are able to ensure that these smallholders can produce the food we need, let's forget about development. That is, I think, something we have to remember. So when IFAD started its program on adaptation of smallholder agriculture in 2012, we started working with the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable. As the Deputy Prime Minister was saying earlier, they didn't cause climate. They don't generate the big emissions. Nonetheless, they are the most vulnerable. Every time there is a climate shock, they lose their only asset. The donkey is the asset, or the cow. They have to pay education fees. They have to pay for health. So investing in those poorest of the poor in the rural areas is super important. And getting them from that cycle of poverty, going around, every time there is a shock, they lose everything again. So we have to make sure that we work in creating this resilience. So through our ASA program, the adaptation of a smallholder program, we really work with 41 countries, some of the most vulnerable countries in the world, majority in Africa, but some in Asia and some in Latin America. And what we did is really a bottom-up approach, working with the government and the smallholders to define what the priorities were. And the priorities were very different from country to country. There is no recipe. There is no silver bullet that will solve the problems. In some countries, Mozambique told us we need first to understand what is the temperature like in the rural areas. These smallholders live in very remote areas with very little access. Not access to roads, access to inputs, access to information, access to health, access to education. So part of our challenge is really how to reach those smallholders. But apart from that, making sure that we understand what the needs are, something that we have learned as well is that we have to work with many partners to really help them out. Because another element that is key for us is the fact that half of the smallholders are women. The needs of women are very different to the needs of men. There are some value chains that are very good for men, but not interesting for women. So part of our job is to really start looking at the sustainable food systems from the inputs, from the beginning, and see how we can attract the youth, because you will remember, all of us, that in the rural areas we have a huge aging population. The smallholders now producing food for 80% of this developing world are in average 60, but we have farmers of 80 or 75. So we need to make agriculture attractive for the youth. And climate investments is a very good solution to bring the attention of the youth to the agricultural sector. They need certain key elements that we need to provide them with. But when we talk about renewable energies, as the previous panel was talking, that's something that interests a lot to the youth population. Post-harvest facilities, accessing the market, having a better system to produce and process food, processing themselves and accessing the markets. So we see that there are a lot of options to make sure that we are inclusive and taking into account that every country has different requirements, but we are now working with the youth with the targeting policy that tells us you have to work with the poorest, the poor, and the most vulnerable in the rural areas, which we know are the poorest people around the world. We also have to work with the private sector, and we are now starting to implement our private sector strategy. So with all those lessons that we have learned since 2012 in the ASA program, we started our partnership with the GCF, and we are very proud to say our first country is a small island state, is Belize, because we know they are extremely vulnerable. Agriculture is a big challenge in the small island states. Importing food is one of the big problems for small island states. But the next work we are now doing in partnership with the GCF is working with Niger in trying to find solutions also to attract the National Bank of Agriculture to help attract the private sector to work on adaptation. Because in the climate summit, we were hearing some of the big companies saying, we now understand that if we don't support smallholders to adapt to climate change, we will not have the raw materials to produce chocolates, the cashew nuts, the peanuts that we need. So we need to invest in those areas so that the private sector, as it was said before, and several of my predecessors talk about the de-risking. The interest is there. The private sector sees that without adapting to climate, we will not have the food that needs to be produced. Thanks, Leonard.
Thank you so much. Really interesting perspectives. Tolika, when ARC was created, it had a very good idea at its core, which was we'll provide parametric insurance for drought to African countries, but we will also help you develop the plans and the strategies to be able to use that money in the most impactful way when it comes in. How, in your perspective, how do you see innovative finance helping strengthen disaster risk finance in Africa and beyond? And second, again, where do you see players like the GCF supporting platforms like ARC?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leo. Good afternoon. And I'd really like to thank the organizers for including the African risk capacity on this panel, because I think it very nicely bridges the investment piece with the unprotected. So what you have just been talking about, we are here because there's a whole group of this global society that is unprotected in the face of climate-related disasters. And so this conversation, I think, is so extremely important. And I think the partnerships conversations are going to be extremely important, but beyond conversation, taking those partnerships into activity. So I'm just going to put out 4 pieces of statistics out there. 6% to 37%, 60%, trillions, and 5%. The 6 to 37, 6% is what, as of now, or as of last month, has been estimated to be the possible cost on the GDP of Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe as a result of tropical cyclone Idai and Kenneth, yet counting. 30% is what the last cyclone cost of GDP for Fiji. 37% was the cost of the last cyclone for Vanuatu. These dislocations on the national balance sheets are serious dislocations. It's taking every progress that we have made on the investment side and reversing it overnight or over a matter of a few days. The 60% you mentioned is already the agrarian population. For most of Africa, I speak because this is where I'm focused on. And we heard earlier today that there is a need in Africa that is such a huge gap. 60%, that 60% of the rural agricultural producers is actually women, as you rightly said. Those are the most vulnerable households. When you couple that with the impacts of HIV/AIDS and other illnesses, you're really talking about largely female-run households to bring up future generations that are going to be part of this global world. The trillions of dollars is the amount of assets under management in the financial sector, of which less than 5% is directed at climate-related interventions. So BNP, I thank you that you were here and you continue to encourage us. There, for me, is where the opportunity lies. What we do as African Risk Capacity, a solution brought out of the UN, WFP, to try and be ahead of the game, to try and provide early interventions, early warnings, capacity building for our governments. There are similar pools for the Caribbean and a similar pool for the Pacific. So, and I think there's one now being done by the World Bank for Asia. The idea is really to pool these risks in order to de-risk this intervention that is climate related. But we come at it from the point of we spend trillions investing upfront. We spend billions in mitigation. We spend billions in adaptation. We do nothing to protect the downside when those events strike. So we can invest in agriculture, we can invest in infrastructure, we can invest in hospitals and schools, but when you have a tropical cyclone or a flood, or a drought for that matter, the downside effect is to reverse all those gains. All those gains we've made under the SDGs get reversed. And so what can we do up front to try and help governments? Because the most vulnerable households are the ones who are likely to regard protection as an expense, in this case, insurance. They are the most uninsured in almost all cases. So we try and work with the governments, together with donor funding, to help governments purchase insurance, such that when there is a drought in a country, or there is a flood, or there is a tropical cyclone, then there's a very early intervention. World Bank report published some years ago shows that intervention that is rolled out within the first 3 months of a disaster being declared is worth $4. $1 of intervention today is worth $4 9 months later. So these multiples are things we really should keep in mind. And therein, I think, lies the proposition of using the financial sector more proactively, not only in putting on assets that are green assets, but also in coming up with innovations about how do we protect the downside. And so this is what the African Risk Capacity does. As we speak, we are in the process. So the early warning system allows us to determine very quickly when a drought in particular is going to strike. We are in the process. The agricultural season in Senegal is closing next week. We are right now in the process of preparing a check to pay Senegal because their insurance triggered. We will also be paying Côte d'Ivoire in the next few weeks. But we work with these countries not just to sell the insurance. We work with the countries up front, and I think the minister from Africa mentioned, from Togo, we work with our countries in what we call contingency planning and technical assistance, where we walk them through, first of all, identifying the types of risks that they're most vulnerable to. Secondly, telling them what is the spectrum of possible solutions you have, so you can have immediately a disaster risk fund. Beyond that disaster risk fund, you can offset using the World Bank's CAT DDOs, for example. And then beyond that, you can go into insurance. At the extreme end, we will rely on humanitarian aid. But that should be at the extreme end. That process takes anywhere between 12 and 18 months, after which a country gets what we call a certificate of good standing, given by an independent panel. Only then can they say we are aware, we're clear buyers of insurance or CAT DDOs or other products. Where do I see the opportunity? I see, by the way, the African risk capacity is only 6 years old. So it truly was an innovative creation out of the World Fruit Program. We have had 33, it's an agency of the African Union. So 33 countries, African countries, have signed up the treaty. 24 have signed a memorandum of understanding so that we can do this work with them. And so far, 11 have actually purchased policies to the tune of $60 million off of their own national balance sheet. So, but this is a real trade-off. The Gambia has told us clearly that the cost of the premium is a budget for 2 units in their government. So these, to talk about the awareness, these are problems that our governments understand and accept and are really looking for global experience and support in order to put solutions in. So where do I see the opportunity with One Planet, and in particular with the GCF? And we were there 2 weeks ago for the private summit. I'm very excited that you have opened this private window. I think that there is huge opportunity to really bring in the private sector, using private sector tools to deliver public good, is how I see this. So that private sector window, I think, is something we should leverage. I agree and I sympathize that the process is quite long, understandably so. You are also handling taxpayers' money elsewhere and must be held accountable. But if there is any way, and we are looking already at a smaller entry point or a less painful entry point, which is the readiness program, where we think there is a fantastic confluence between green climate and ourselves, because we're already doing contingency work. So the readiness program will help us to work with the countries to make sure that they understand more and plan more for this. I also think there's a huge opportunity for One Planet and GCF to become an aggregator, as we are doing here today. Become the aggregator beyond this room, and sector by sector, let us have those conversations. We've talked about agriculture today, but I really think there is an opportunity here to also engage pension funds, to engage insurance companies. The insurance industry, I think, has got to be more aggressively approached. They are already doing this, but I think GCF has an opportunity to really engage them in the same way that the banks have been engaged. Insurance always seems to lag. We first did microfinance, then we did SME finance with the banks, then we did green bonds with the banks. Insurance has pockets of assets under management. And I think if I can take one thing out of this room, it will be your commitment, Yannick, that you will have a specific intervention with the insurance companies. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much to this panel. I think you've seen the importance of innovation and adaptation, the role that asset managers can play, that UN agencies working with local banks can play, that insurance platforms can play. The mitigation to some extent is a deployment game. We need to deploy. Adaptation is in some ways more complex because it's all about the local circumstances, and that's where we'll need a lot of the best minds and the best thinking, and we have to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think that we will remember the words of Dolika Banda, who just remember us that we need to protect the most vulnerable for the physical risk. Physical risk is made by hurricanes. So we will end this very important conference with so many strong words, with the last but very important theme, which is financial markets, how we mobilize them for climate change through blended finance. There are many examples. But now remember when we start, the figures, 15 billions. And as Dolika said, there are a lot of more billions in many places. So to the last panel, I called Jennifer Morris, who is the COO of Conservation International, to make a keynote speech to talk about that. And after that, we will have our last panel, moderated by Brune Poisson, about how to mobilize financial markets. So, Jennifer, sorry, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? I know we're the last speakers before happy hour, so this is going to be a very exciting discussion. I first want to thank the Secretary of State and really the entire government of France for your leadership with the One Planet Summit, and of course, bringing in the GCF to this critical conversation is amazing. I also want to appreciate the governments that have pledged and that will pledge tomorrow for the replenishment of the GCF. This is incredibly important, and you're on the right side of history. I hope your leadership will one day inspire my country, the United States, the world's second largest emitter, to follow your lead. Hopefully next year, or maybe the next. Everyone in this room knows how important it is that we act now, and we act fast, as we only have about 10 years to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But one solution that's often overlooked is the one that's right in front of us. Perfected by the evolution of our planet for over 4 billion years, one of the best and most cost-effective ways we have to sequester carbon is nature herself. And she's ready for investment now. Science tells us that nature is more than 30% of the solution to climate change, yet it receives only 2% of the financing. In fact, $500 billion is invested annually in mitigation and adaptation finance, yet only 2%, $10 billion, is funneled towards natural climate solution. The United States spends over 4 times of that amount every year in pet food. Clearly, we as an international community can do better. If nature is 30% of the solution, shouldn't we be investing 30% of the financing, or about $150 billion annually? So why aren't we? Part of the reason is because until recently, nature-based solutions have been financed primarily through grant philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. This funding is limited and limiting. To scale, we need business models for nature-based solutions that attracts private capital with a positive financial ROI, return on investment, for private investors that also deliver strong social and environmental returns. However, if this was a perfect functioning market, it would already be working perfectly. At this stage in the market's evolution, investing in nature-based solutions will require patient, long-term capital with return expectations that do not undermine local communities' ability to make a living from conserving nature rather than destroying it. And as Felipe said, and many of the speakers, there are investable businesses, especially in the SME space. And I'm happy to say I have a lot of hope. We are seeing a historic change in private investors' interest in investing in nature. From large multinational companies who are being pressured by their investors and, I will add, their millennial employees, to pension funds who have very long-term time horizons. And they have customers who really want to know that their future pensions will not be paid from profits earned from the destruction of the planet. But we need investable models that are de-risked, as everyone has said today, for corporates to engage at scale and use funding from treasury budgets instead of limited foundation and corporate sustainable budgets. This is where the GCF comes in. I strongly believe that one of the best roles the Green Climate Fund can play in nature-based solutions is to use its critical financing to help de-risk investments by private investors. At Conservation International and other partners, we are being approached almost weekly by companies and institutions seeking investable nature-based projects. And the term is often not the problem. Pension funds, for example, have return horizons of several decades, and this is potential funding at scale. In fact, if the top 3 pension funds in the United States invested just 5% of their total assets in nature-based solutions, we could reach our 150 billion goal globally and close the financing gap. Large companies as well are sitting on lots of cash with limited returns in traditional fixed income instruments. They're seeking better options that have a return for nature, but of course have concerns over risk compared to the more traditional investments. As the GCF enters its next cycle, I would encourage us all to look for these opportunities to de-risk nature-based investments and to demonstrate and realize the total value of these investments. But we have a long way to go. As of June 2019, only 10% of the GCF's funding went to projects labeled as forestry, land use, or ecosystems, approximately $506 million for the duration of the funding cycle. If we're going to actually scale to 30%, we need 6 times that amount, at least $3 billion in nature-based solution projects for the period of 2020 to 2023. And if we're going to take advantage of where the money really is in the private sector, we need alignment of investments and incentives, committed public finance, a thriving carbon market, as well as demonstrable examples of success on the ground, combining production, protection, and governance in place. I look forward to working with the GCF and other agencies, and especially direct access entities, to blend GCF funding with private capital and actively seek opportunities to create true value for investors, employees, and for the taxpayers who have invested in the Green Climate Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now we will have our last panel with Brune Poisson, Rémi Rioux, CEO of AFD, EFD and IDFC, Ludger Schuknecht, qui est le Deputy Secretary General of OECD, and last, Shade Duffy, who is Head of Corporate Governance at AXA IM. So the floor is yours for our last panel.
Great, thank you for being here still. So let me just go straight to the point, perhaps. So on the one hand, the annual investment gap is of $3.4 trillion US. I mean, that's the amount if we consider energy storage, transportation, or green building. And on the other hand, so that's on the one hand. On the other hand, in the north, there is strong pressure on public budgets, at least in France, and there is taxpayer fatigue. So how do we bridge that? What does it mean? It means that concessional money is scarce and that it's precious. And I think we can see that with the GCF replenishment. I mean, we've gone pretty far and fast, although there is still one night to achieve even more. But we've seen that it can be really a challenge. So I think our duty is to make the best possible use of this concessional financing. How? By maximizing its impact in terms of private finance mobilization and also environmental impact. So as highlighted earlier today, blended finance can offer guarantee mechanisms that make it possible to actually unlock the huge amount of private money for adaptation and mitigation. So the question is, how do we coordinate these de-risking mechanisms in a common framework to go to scale? How do we do that? So one way of doing that, and I really liked the report and the study that was just put out by Deepak Dasgupta from TERI, India, Saini Nafo from the presidency of Mali, and Jean-Charles Ocade from the IPCC. And what do they show? And what do they recommend, rather? They recommend that a club of countries issue a set of guarantees and bring them together for low-carbon investments around 3 core principles. First, to abate emissions where it is cheaper. Second, to support projects aligned with the NDCs of developing countries and bridge their infrastructure finance gap, while also increasing at the same time their creditworthiness. And third, they recommend crowding and this would lead to crowd and much more private capital investment in mitigation actions. This approach would lead to better coordinate existing de-risking mechanisms around basic principles, and it would generate a new asset class based on the social value of climate action. So that could be a way forward. Now, that said, how do we do that concretely? And so perhaps one leading voice in that field is Rémi Rioux. You're the CEO, but needless to introduce you, CEO of the French Development Bank and IDFC. So, Rémi, with the GCF, IFD, the French Development Bank, has launched the initiative called Transforming Financial Systems for Climate that mobilizes
about $1.3 billion euros for climate mitigation and adaptation project in 16 African countries and in Ecuador as well. So concretely, this initiative is key as it makes the link between international finance and local public and private intermediaries, which will be able to invest in sustainable projects. So can you tell us a bit more about what makes that deal innovative? How also can we replicate such type of initiative? How can we go to scale? How can we make sure that this initiative with IDFC members and can actually go to scale and mobilize other banks? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Good evening, everybody. Let me first express my if there are parties in the room still hesitant, let me first express the strongest and full support to the GCF replenishment. GCF has a fantastic team led by Yannick. I've seen Oyun, Babita, Leo in the room, so thanks to them. And GCF, of course, is a revolution for the global finance architecture because of direct access, mostly, and because also of its flexibility. I was in Cape Town with Trevor Manuel in October 2011. I was in Berlin in December 2014, and I remember the various steps that led to this very room, and I also know that Berlin paved the way to Paris and to the success of COP21. And so what you are doing today and tomorrow is of the utmost importance for the success of COP25, then COP26. It's a cycle that is opening up right now. I'm not saying that as a personal view, actually. I'm saying that as the chairman of the IDFC, International Development Finance Club. And so I solemnly express this support. IDFC is the club that gathers, as you know, the 26 largest national and regional development banks, $500 billion a year financing, 150 each year for climate. We were in New York for the Climate Action Summit. We committed $1 billion by 2025. For the first time, collectively, we published a study on what does it mean concretely to align with the Paris Agreement. We built a strategic partnership with the GCF. And I really want to plead for the role of national development banks. It was mentioned already in the room when talking about blended finance, because they are so deeply rooted in their constituencies and because they have a $4 trillion balance sheet probably to be leveraged. And of course, IDFC, as you know, is only the tip of the iceberg. There are probably about 550 national public financial institutions willing to align with international priorities. And the GCF is the glue between us. There are already 12 members of the IDFC accredited to the fund, 13 projects already approved, 850 million euro tapped. And it's only, I think, the beginning. And I come to your point, Minister. Three examples of what we can provide. The first one is what BOAD. You know, BOAD is the bank for Western African countries, YMU countries, and they have approved its project number 105. A large project to scale up solar energy in the region while extending the tenor of loans for public and private banks for $140 million. So first example. Second example is the Pro 98, FP 98, proposed by DBSA, the Development Bank of South Africa, a climate finance facility for Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, Eswatini to de-risk and ensure the bankability of climate projects. And hopefully last but not least, you mentioned the TFSC program that AFD proposed, which is, as the others, very innovative. It's a program through local intermediaries to finance mostly adaptation projects. It was mentioned by Ibrahim and others. And of course, he's in 16 African countries plus Ecuador these days. And really, it's to reorient, redirect private flows in the direction of smallholders, in the direction of agriculture, in the direction of energy, in the direction of waste management, that are, as you know, very difficult to finance by existing banking sector. So we will develop this. The ambition is large. It's more than $1 billion for the whole program, including the private finance. But these are examples of the capacity of national and regional development banks to blend finance with the private sector. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rémi. These were concrete examples of how you went about developing blended finance mechanisms. Now, obviously, the private sector did not wait for public sector banks and organizations to start working and exploring that space. So could you tell us a bit more, as an asset manager, what are the other types of partnerships that you feel are needed if we want to increase available private capital for the environment and perhaps more broadly for the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you very much for seeking our perspectives. We're AXA investment managers. We manage assets on behalf of many of the institutional investors that you want to be in this room. Our clients are insurance companies, they're pension funds. So we have some insight into what is needed to make sure they play a much more active role in this space. So when I think about our role in the ecosystem, we're responsible investors. We're responsible investors with access to a large pool of capital. And the role that we play is that, of course, we have to manage our clients' assets. We do attention to their financial returns needs. But as responsible investors, which many of us in the asset management industry are now embracing, we need to make sure that we're doing that with a conscious effort and attention to how that impacts society. So when we start to talk about redirecting capital, there's a broad approach to doing it. The first thing is, what should we not invest in? And how do we redirect that capital to what we should be investing in? So, for example, we're working with our clients, actually we worked with our clients to divest from a range of unsustainable activities. So, no oil sands, no coal. And we're now putting that money into investments that are more aligned with sustainable development broadly, environmental and social. But one of the things you mentioned and others have said, it's, we can focus on niche capital. A capital that has, a label about doing good. But in terms of the scale of the challenge that we face, it is really imperative that we use the skill of everything we invest in to move to a common goal. So apart from what we won't do, what do we do and what are we doing? So in our mainstream assets, not just those that were labeled green or sustainable, we have to make sure that we're really managing them with due attention to environmental and social outcomes. It is very important to do so. And part of the work that we're doing and initiatives we're promoting is to start thinking about how do we transition. So one of the initiatives we're looking at is, we're thinking of transition bonds. We invest a lot in green bonds, but what about moving brown industries towards a more greener direction? That brings new capital to address these common objectives. But in addition to that, finally, we're really very intentional about solutions. And our clients, insurance companies, have the capital that you want. So one of the things that I'd like to really highlight is the fact that AXA Group, which is our parent company, committed 12 billion of capital to green assets by 2020. And we as AXA investment managers are working with them to really turn that commitment into action. So to talk about a particular project that's very, very close to my heart. So earlier this year, around June, we've now put 200 million euros of new capital into a climate and biodiversity fund. So aligning, climate and biodiversity, because we really do agree that they work in lockstep. So this is money that is available right now. We're looking at projects, and there are lots of players in this room. So please, please come talk to us. How will you blend your capital with our readily available capital to increase the scale of impacts that we can generate? So it's not about concept. It's not about launching a fund. The money is available right now. We're evaluating projects globally, and we want to work with you. And finally, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I can't finish this without saying what we could do better, because that's what's really going to attract my clients and align their goal with yours. It's been mentioned before. Please, 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 please make the process less cumbersome. We have invested in so many blended projects, not directly, but with other partners, and it takes so long. Money not working is money not creating impact. It's a clear message. You can have all the process and everything, but if we don't put money to work, we're not doing anything. We're not achieving our goals. The second thing is, it's not just about blended capital. Blended capital is important, but let's think about other things. The first one is, there's so much knowledge in this room. Practical experience of the challenges, the risks, everything. Now, private capital, we have to do risk and opportunities and put that into our model. Share that with us. Maybe we're over-egging the risks. Maybe if you share your experience in investing and we put that into our models, it's not such a risk after all. Secondly, regulations. So many of you have influence on regulations. Make them clear. Make them international. We need certainty around our capital. And finally, there are lots of us that are willing to do this work. But there's, apart from your experience, there's also knowledge. EIB alone has more climate scientists than we'll ever have. Put that knowledge into the market. Educate us. So for me, those are the things that we need to do. And I am really confident that if we do this, our clients are willing. They have a stake in this world too, and they want to come along. But let's make it easier. Thank you.
Great. Let's make it easy. Well, so how do we do that? I'm kind of becoming schizophrenic. On the one hand, I hear that there are a lot of projects and yet no money is flowing in. And on the other hand, I hear that there is that there are very few projects and that there is too much money available. So how do we do that? How do we coordinate all that? Perhaps Mr. Chuknet from the OECD, perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that. I know you've been doing some really, really not only fascinating, but very useful work to provide concrete answers to some of the questions that were raised by our panelists. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. It's a great pleasure to be here and to see still a full room, even at this late hour, and to follow also such distinguished colleagues. You mentioned the huge investment gap that needs to be filled to have infrastructure in place. And I was surprised to read, in the context of preparing myself for this meeting, that actually to do it in a sustainable green manner is not that much more expensive. But it needs to be done. And I think the question you raised of having more streamlined processes to get the money on the road, to have more coordination, I think these are buzzwords that are very important in this regard. And in order to get the money on the road, to have the bankable projects, I'd like to make 3 points. The first one is that we need to accelerate the preparation. And there it's key to have support at each step of the investment chain. And this support exists in different forms today, but it can be enhanced further through coordination and scaling up. So at project preparation, the project preparation stage, that is very important. We have project preparation facilities, which are essential to help develop countries to develop and originate bankable projects. And at the initial financing stage, we need mechanisms to provide low-cost financing to national development banks and local financial institutions so that